Back to Eldarland, finally. It's been too long since I've talked about those precious space elves of mine. There's something that really speaks to me about the arrogant, aloof pointy-ears who seem to get bullied at every turn by the universe at large and the company that owns them. What that says about me, I have no idea and don't really want to know, but regardless, I'm still firmly on Team Eldar. And there's one of them who likes to get around more than any other. You can find him talking to other Eldar, humans, and really anyone that'll give him the time of day. And usually what he says is worth listening to, because he's got a track record of either being right or close enough that you probably should have just listened to him anyways. Eldrad Ulthran, who I am going to call by his first name only for the rest of the video because saying Ulthran makes me feel like I'm talking with a mouthful of cotton. Let's look at the premier Eldar character who's guided the Eldar for thousands upon thousands of years, ensuring this race will forever be known as a dying one rather than an outright dead one. And for the Eldar, sometimes you just gotta take what you can get. Eldrad Ulthran is one old Eldar. When I say old, I mean that by the time of the Horus Heresy, he was already a fairly influential Farseer who may or may not have been friends with the Emperor himself. While they had a falling out and weren't exactly on the best speaking terms anymore, that's huge. I don't believe it's stated why they had a falling out. Between the Emperor not being a fan of aliens and trying to break into the Eldar highway, it could realistically be either of them who decided to end that little relationship. During the Horus Heresy, he was a bit of a side character, for you see, despite being one of the smartest beings and strongest psychers in the galaxy, he was not a space marine or a primarch. He wasn't even one of the 5 regular human beings allowed to be someone important, like Angron Zangria's ship commander Sotara, or Sortera, whatever her name is. You don't have any interest in her character, you just want her to step on you, be honest with yourself. He tried to do a couple different things to sway the situation away from a chaos victory, frequently in opposition to almost everyone else. For example, he tried to warn the Imperium of Horus's treachery, which damn well could have stopped this whole mess in its tracks, or at least prevent a total wipeout for the Imperium. Unfortunately, he spoke to Fulgrim, who had already picked up the penis blade and was being corrupted by a keeper of secrets, so all that really resulted in was a great big pile of nothing. Less than nothing, actually, because he got a lot of Eldar, including a Wraithlord, killed. His track record during this time does improve, though, so while his opening move in the Heresy might have been a failure, he does get better at messing around from the sidelines. To showcase an example about this, we talk about one of the most mid-additions to Warhammer that the Horus Heresy has brought to us, the Cabal. We know they fail, we know they're wiped out because they never ever make an appearance in 40k proper, but they are Xenos theoretically being important, so I'm at least partially inclined to like them for that reason alone. You see, the Cabal had seen what they thought the writing on the wall said and saw that the Heresy had 2 outcomes. The Loyalists win and the galaxy is condemned to a slow death as chaos consumes a gutted, corrupted Imperium, or a traitor win where chaos goes hog wild for a few hundred years, burns itself out, and then everyone except humanity wins in the end. Eldrad thought this was phenomenally stupid, however, so in response he did a few things that make him pretty cool. He talked to John Grammaticus, one of those perpetual folks that can't die, even though in this setting that's probably the happiest ending you can hope for, and gave him an option to not only cease his workings with the Cabal, but also stop being a traitor to his race, which, goddamn Eldrad, way to guilt trip a guy. It worked, at least, but Christ, dude, maybe pull back just a little bit. Next up, kill the entire Cabal, an organization that reputedly has been around longer than mankind had been an intelligent species. Just kill it. You know what they say, shoot for the moon, and even if you miss, you'll end up among the stars. Except Eldrad didn't miss, having played several thousands of hours as a sniper in Team Fortress 2. He and his agents went to town on the Cabal, eliminating its members one by one. He had even recruited a loyalist wordbearer for his cause, one Barthusa Narek, which huge props to Eldrad for this one, by the way. Not only finding a space marine willing to hear out an alien, but a loyalist wordbearer of all the possible ones. Where the fuck did he find him, and are there any more like him? The last one he killed was an autarch named Slough Da. Aside from having a weird name, this fine Eldar specimen infiltrated members of the Cabal into the Black Library and called Eldrad a race traitor before he was killed. Which on the one hand, does he really have any right to say that when he's sneaking people into the Black Library of all places? But on the other hand, Harlequins did show up to defend him against Eldrad, so maybe he had a point. Then again, they're Harlequins, so them doing it for a laugh is a very distinct possibility. Kegarak may damn well have just been bored that day and needed something to cheer him up, since relatively speaking, Slaanesh eating his entire family didn't happen that long ago. During the Horus temper tantrum, he also got Vulcan stabbed with magic lightning. That's what him talking to John Grammaticus was all about, by the way. That was his out to not be a race traitor anymore. Shout out to Warhammer 40k for being perhaps the only context I can say the words race traitor in that doesn't make me sound like an iFunny comments section. He also spoke to Vulcan Vulcan in the guise of an old man and told him to return to Terra because his destiny demanded it, or some elf crap like that. This meeting went down a lot better than Fulgrim's visit, both because he was disguised as a human and because Vulcan doesn't have a penchant for picking up swords with cock veins on them. Vulcan gave him a tooth as thanks. Bit weird, but whatever. Then the Horus Heresy ends, the Emperor gets whomped, and Horus gets whomped even harder, and Eldrad is now definitely not going to be speaking to Big E again anytime soon. But there's more pressing things to worry about than these two faction leaders being on speaking terms again, because now the orcs get to be actually important with the War of the Beast. I'm not going to recap the whole war here, because this is Eldrad's video, and quite frankly I just don't feel like it, but Eldrad did a few key things worth noting. He sent a group of 7 Harlequins to deliver a message to Terra itself, a message of peace proposing a temporary alliance. Naturally, they delivered this peaceful message by slaughtering their way to the Golden Throne and butchering any custodies that stood in their way until the last one standing was captured. The last Harlequin standing, that is. The other 6 died, slaughtering more than their fair share of custodies. This last one presented the Drake's Tooth Vulcan gave Eldrad as proof of their peaceful intentions. Now, there's a couple of things I want to touch on briefly before moving on. 1, how the hell does that prove anything? What is so special about this tooth that it makes the Harlequin seem at all trustworthy? Did it say property of Vulcan and Nocturnian on it? How did the Imperium know the Eldar didn't just defang some poor dragon and show up with that? But that's not the most important thing here, just something I find vaguely funny. The second thing I want to touch upon is that I recall reading somewhere online that the author of the story said they goofed and said custodians when they didn't mean to. That the Eldar just murdered a bunch of normal guards rather than that many of the 10,000. I couldn't find out if that's confirmed or not, but I fully believe the Harlequins slaughtered custodians left and right. Reason 1, Harlequins are proper deadly, so if any Eldar can take a custodies, it's them. Reason 2, they're more or less the counterpart of the Eldar to the custodies. The custodians are the personal army of the God Emperor, the Harlequins are the personal army of the Clown God. 3, I like the Eldar more than the custodies, so as far as I'm concerned, my biggest takeaway from this story is fuck you, got mine. How's it feel to be on the receiving end of the average dudes from one faction slaughtering the elites of yours, Imperium fans? But they're the custodies, but they're the Harlequins. See how far that line of reasoning goes? I told you I was coming back to sim for the Eldar in this video. Never doubt me on that. Anyways, Eldrad also calmed the warp to allow the Imperial Fist successor chapters to reach Terra and put an end to the orc threat there. And Eldar, who interact with the warp as little as possible to avoid getting their souls slurped up by Slaanesh, calmed the warp. I'm half convinced that Eldrad just wanted to brag about how powerful he was here. Helping the Imperium out was just an excuse for him to showboat a bit. Like, oh, you can shoot lightning, Mephiston? That's cute. Let me tell the gods themselves to shut the hell up. After single-handedly saving the Imperium of Man, Eldrad would go on to do many things of the mystical elf-wizard variety. Eldrad's by this point been the chief Farseer of Craftworld Ulthway, his home craftworld, which I am now realizing I forgot to mention at the beginning of this video. As an Eldar, he's naturally a big fan of manipulating things from behind the scenes, especially given that there aren't exactly a lot of Eldar to go around anymore, so discretion is usually the better part of valor for him. His reading of the Strands of Fate have resulted in him doing all sorts of things to prevent complete catastrophe down the line. He warned Craftworld Iyanden of the Tyranid fleet that would soon come to devour most of their craft world. That might not sound impressive, but consider that they chose not to take him seriously, and either way, 4/5 of the craft world getting devoured is better than 5/5 of it. Infinitely better, in fact. Oh, and you know Armageddon? He did that. The legendary rivalry between Yarrick and Ghazghkull, the massive battle royale that was the planet, all him. He was the one who put Ghazghkull on the path to become the biggest orc warlord in the galaxy, because otherwise a warlord more threatening to the Eldar specifically would have arisen. Which, you know, you win some, you lose some. I think he did fine. Early in his life, and possibly before the Horus Heresy, couldn't quite figure it out, so there's your warning, for I'm not entirely sure when this takes place. He also had dealings with Jain Zar and dealing with orcs in yet other ways. The gist of the story is that Jain Zar and the most senior Farseer of Ulthway at the time wanted to leave a gathering Orc-Wa alone. Eldrad disagreed because in his visions he saw it would curb stomp Ulthway into paste. So he rallied the armies of Ulthway, and indeed even the Avatar of Cain, went to fight the orcs and got his shit wrecked. Which initially you might think, wow, way to go Eldrad. But later down the line it actually prevented much greater catastrophe. As a result of Eldrad's expedition, which as an unrelated aside would make a great name for a 40k platformer or roguelite, several other Orc-Was ended up being destroyed and prevented wars between the Eldar craft worlds. Additionally, Phoenix Lords like Jain Zar are absolutely terrifying, even if GW loves nothing more than giving them zero credit or indeed allowing their minis to remain purchasable. Their mere presence actively rewrites fate itself so that it aligns with their goals. In the face of that, no shit Eldrad's plan didn't go perfectly. He's a fortune teller, he reads what the future is going to be like, which is kind of hard to do when someone who rewrites the future just by existing is standing 5 feet behind you. Of course, as arguably the main Eldar character, at least in terms of overall plot development, he's had a few shining moments of glory to himself. The biggest one is something that I bet even the staunchest of Eldar haters will appreciate just a little bit, because it involves making Abaddon look like a clown. The War Master and one of his sorcerers decided that attacking the Seer Council of Ulthran would be a grand way to spend the time. After all, Eldrad and his fellow Farseers have an annoying habit of pissing all over his plans whenever they get a chance, so Abaddon decided he'd get rid of that thorn in his side once and for all. And the end result? Abaddon and Eldrad face off in hand-to-hand combat, and Abaddon's armor gets shredded. And just when Abaddon thinks he's got the upper hand and is about to end Eldrad's existence, our Space Elven hero stabs him in the throat. Abaddon teleports away, and we have yet another resounding Eldar W. Now, to be as fair as I can bring myself to be for the armless asshole, Eldrad's inner monologues mentions how this was one future out of 1,000 times 1,000 where every Eldar involved dies a horrible death. And even beside that, immediately after this, Eldrad foresaw that Abaddon's crusades would not only resume, but grow even bloodier and more destructive than ever before. But who gives a shit? Abaddon's such a loser he lost a fistfight with a wizard. I bet Archaon would have gotten the job done, you power-armored fuckface. Another miscellaneous thing about him, he used to be dead. In the old Eye of Terror campaign, he died during the 13th Black Crusade as he was investigating a Blackstone fortress, I believe it was. He felt a dark presence inside, which, yeah, that checks out, but it turns out that dark presence was that of Slaanesh itself. Eldrad tried to escape but was pulled into her gaping maw, or some other gaping hole. It's Slaanesh after all. That being said, Eldrad evidently has a whole lot of spirit stones, and while most of them went dim, some stayed lit. Even when he's been devoured by Slaanesh, you still can't get rid of this bastard. Of course, then the whole event was retconned out of existence, but hey, still noteworthy. And of course, there's the most recent big thing he's known for, trying and largely failing to wake a god up from a nap, or bring it into existence. With the warp, those two things may damn well be the same. See, Eldrad saw the writing on the wall after the whole Abaddon thing and realized that it's not looking great for the Eldar, humanity, or really anyone who isn't Chaos, the Orcs, and Tyranids. Those last two only because they love fighting and don't really give a shit about living in the galaxy, respectively. So he hatched a plan. Inyad originally required waiting for every Eldar ever to die so he could coalesce and defeat Slaanesh once and for all. A great victory against Chaos that obviously isn't really ideal for the elves because they're dead. Hard to enjoy the after party if you didn't even make it to the finale. So our boy had his little idea. Why not just jumpstart the process a bit? Calling in about as many favors as one being could possibly be owed at this point and leveraging every single bit of goodwill his reputation had given him, he and his Harlequin allies gathered the crystallized remains of every Eldar seer from every single craft world and brought them to the moon of Koharia, orbiting the planet of Port Demesnes. The whole planet was at the edge of the Eldar Empire when Slaanesh was born, which somehow made it so that the whole thing was saturated in psychic energy. You ever see that meme about how there's theoretically a distance from a nuclear bomb detonation where you can perfectly cook a chicken? That's what I imagine was up with this place. Just close enough to Slaanesh's birth that the whole thing was magical, not so close that it was also chaos corrupted. He had some more allies from Ulthran and Saimhan launch a diversionary attack on a nearby Imperial naval facility to ensure that the Mon Kai would be far too busy dealing with that to investigate what he was doing. These allies, by the way, were left in the dark as to what exactly was going on. It was just him and his Harlequin allies on the moon who were performing the ritual, and they were largely left in peace at first. Until the Deathwatch showed up, dick in one hand and chainsword in the other. The entire planet of Port Demesnes was burning to the ground as the Eldar's diversionary campaign raged on and Imperial forces countered. But the Deathwatch were smart enough to both notice Koharia and realize that Eldar attacks only look random. There's always a reason for them. The Deathwatch engaged the Harlequins and Eldrad kept on concentrating. During the battle, a Death Jester outright asked the Deathwatch captain if he would allow 1 trillion humans to die just to spite this one Eldar operation, despite the fact that it would launch a crippling strike against Chaos. The Harlequin was even noted as having his voice genuinely filled with disbelief and despair as he asked the question. And I'm not kidding you, the Deathwatch literally just says yes and shoots him in the face. Legitimately, the dude just recreated the goddamn Chad meme. I know it's been run into the ground and you're probably cringing at the fact I brought it up, but that's what it was. He then shot a plasma blast at Eldrad, who deflected it with magic because, yeah, he can just do that. Unfortunately, that little blast was all it took to disrupt the ritual, as Eldrad had to defend himself, which took his focus away from awakening Inyad. The full consciousness of the god, which very well could have been woken by the power of every Eldar seer in history, remained asleep instead. Though it wasn't a complete failure, as even in its slumber it was roused just enough to reach out and select a champion, Yvrain, who would go on to form the Ynnari. And that adventure is a story for another time, largely because I'm desperately hoping that they'll give the Ynnari some actual credit and stop shitting on them every chance they get. As you can probably guess, Eldrad was not in the good graces of the rest of the Eldar after this. Every single seer they ever had that wasn't in a Wraithbone shell was taken and more or less wasted on this debacle. The only reason he wasn't killed on the spot was the Harlequins intervening, and he was still exiled from Ulthway. While he is repentant about this and admits he's made mistakes, of which Koharia is no doubt top of that list, he doesn't strictly speaking regret his actions. He believes it's time for the Eldar to act more decisively than ever before. The time for sitting back and observing the strings of fate is coming to an end, and only action will save his people. Given that he's the best guy in the setting at reading the future, I'm inclined to agree with him on this one. Though he is quite closely connected to the Inari, I mean he's the one who woke Inayat up for God's sake, he's not fully a part of them. He instead formed his own group, the Exiles, which consists of the Eldar who were banished from Ulthway for their involvement in Eldrad's Fustercluck, as well as any who wish to accompany the Seer. I feel pretty bad for everyone who's not Eldrad in the Exiles, to be honest. With Eldrad, yeah, I get it. If he succeeded, he probably could have saved the Eldar, or at least stopped their souls from being devoured, but he didn't succeed, so I get his banishment. But everyone else had no idea what he was doing on that moon, just that it was super important. So here you are, an Eldar fighting for your life because the unofficial leader of your race says you gotta, and then you're kicked out of your house because apparently he messed up big time. No longer Ulthway's High Farseer, he nonetheless returned to save Ulthway from a demonic incursion. Despite Kairos Fate Weaver himself and several Keeper of Secrets leading the charge, Eldrad and Teclis know one thing in common: power word kill. So the demons were handily destroyed, and Ulthway didn't kill him on the spot for showing back up home again. Nowadays, he leads the Eldar in more campaigns than ever before. For a few miscellaneous things about him, he's slowly turning into Psychic Crystal, as all Farseers eventually do. That being said, it doesn't seem to have slowed him down at all. In fact, it might have just made him even stronger on the tabletop, since he does have more wounds than most Eldar characters. Kind of like the Chaos Dwarfs now that I'm thinking about it, only somewhat less awful. He used to be a musician before he became the end-all be-all Farseer, which is a cool bit of characterization for him. Makes me wonder if he ever just hangs around the concert halls of other races and just vibes for a bit. He's a busy enough Eldar, I'm sure he's earned a break every now and then. He's also pretty convinced that humanity and the Eldar need each other. That's awesome for a few reasons. It shows no small amount of humility for one. Yes, he got a lot of people killed with Armageddon and overall still thinks the Eldar are the best, but he admits that they can't do it alone. He even tells Rabude Gilliman himself as much. And if you think he's full of shit and blinded by arrogance to say humanity needs the Eldar, consider that the Emperor's master plan for keeping humanity safe from the warp involved breaking in the Eldar's house and kicking them out. But no, they don't need the Eldar or their stuff at all. He may also be the Phoenix Lord of the Witch Path. I believe it was Jane Czar who, when interacting with him, stated that she was in the presence of another immortal. And if a Phoenix Lord is saying something like that, I'm inclined to believe her on this. They'd know what that kind of thing looks like. And if nothing else, Farseers usually crystallize after a few thousand years. Eldrad's been going strong for 10,000 and is only just starting to turn into rocks, so something clearly special about him. Briefly, I'd also like to give a defense of Eldrad. Some might say he's incompetent, that he causes more harm than good. And given the way GW writes Xeno's lore, that's not an unfair viewpoint to have. I mean, if you show Xeno's winning, how are the Space Marines gonna win? But in truth, Eldrad isn't incompetent. In fact, he's far from it. I mean, for one, the guy can tell Chaos to calm the hell down for a bit, and that's no small feat, especially for an Eldar. But as for his failures, they're usually the kind of things that are either truly not his fault or end up preventing far worse things down the line. As I mentioned earlier, his failed attack against the Orcs prevented much greater loss in Eldar life later on. Alternatively to that, look at, say, his misadventure with Fulgrim. Slaanesh was actively clouding his vision of what was going on, and when a Chaos God is personally screwing around with you, you're gonna have issues seeing clearly. Or look at Koharia. He only screwed up because he was forced to not tank a Plasma Blast to the chest. There's not exactly a lot of people in the setting that can just eat a Plasma Blast. He's capable of wielding any of the psychic runes the Eldar have come up with and has indeed created no small amount of his own. And if nothing else, just because there's a path to victory he sees doesn't mean there's one that's completely free of loss. In 40k of all places, you shouldn't be surprised that even the most intelligent and competent people can't prevent loss of life sometimes. Since I do or don't characters now, I'll save the rest of my points in favor of him for this section. With that being said, why use Eldrad as part of your army? Well, if you like wizards, he's the premier wizard in the setting. The only people stronger than him in terms of psychic power are either gods or stupid, dumb, arrogant freaks like Magnus. Ahriman is probably his equal, and that's solely due to being a follower of the god of magic for 10,000 years straight. Unwilling follower who hates his god, but that's a feature as far as Tzeentch is concerned. Plus, Eldrad's from the Wizardcraft world too, just for that little bit of extra spice on top. If you like someone who actually acts, not just reacts, you really want Eldrad then. This is something I think is a common Eldar trope, relatively speaking, funnily enough, considering Eldrad's insistence they need to actually do things now. Out of all the factions in 40k, they're the ones that have both ideas and the ability to act on them. The Imperium has plenty of power, and I guess ideas occasionally, but it's mostly running around reacting to one of a billion different threats at any given moment. Sure, the Tau probably have some plans, but they're based on willful ignorance and naivety of the galaxy at large. I guess the Orcs have plans, but that plan is to beat everyone up. Not exactly a Sun Tzu level of thinking there. But the Eldar seem to not only know exactly what they want and need at any given moment, at least within a group, they have the ability to act on those wants and needs. When they can hide from pretty much everyone and show up wherever they want, it's not that relevant they don't have the numbers of everyone else. I'm very pointedly ignoring the Ynnari for this point because those books suck. And Eldrad, more than any other, acts in accordance with what he thinks is best. From the Horus Heresy to the modern day of the setting, he's constantly out and about. He's also closer to the good guy end of the spectrum than most. As with pretty much everyone in 40k who isn't from Iyanden, he's done some horrible shit. But all of his actions come from reasoning that even if you don't agree with, you can see that the motivation is at least somewhat altruistic. You can bring yourself to sympathize with him even if you don't agree with his actions. He's trying to save not just Ulthway but his entire race, and he knows that you gotta break some eggs to make an omelet. He also doesn't think humans are just animals. Lesser than Eldar? Yeah, but not just stupid animals. And as an Eldar himself, that counts for something. He's also worked with the Emperor of Mankind, countless other humans, and pretty much every Eldar in existence of any importance. So if nothing else, he knows the value of teamwork with others, which makes him one of the nicer characters in 40k by default. He's once again a faction leader sort of character, though in an unofficial sort of way I'll admit, so if you like being in charge, he's the perfect character in a way that no other Eldar can quite match. Phoenix Lords are highly revered, but Eldrad's foresight and more means that while people may not strictly speaking follow him, everyone is going to listen when he speaks and suggests something. Also, I think he can fit into really any scenario. Would Eldrad be in charge of a massive operation against the greatest of threats? Absolutely. Look at this artwork. He's taken out the Thousand Suns led by Magnus the Red. If that's not the highest stakes you can get in Warhammer, it's damn close. At the same time, at least personally, I can imagine Eldrad going through some backwater corner of reality looking for some forgotten artifact to turn the tide one way or another. So Eldrad can pretty lore accurately fit into all sorts of game sizes. As for tabletop reasons to go with Eldrad, he's not just a wizard in lore alone. He can cast up to 3 psychic powers a turn, can deny 2 on the enemy's turn, and knows Smite as well as 3 additional powers from either the Runes of Fortune or Runes of Fate disciplines. He can also reroll all of his psychic tests because he has decided he's casting the spell today and you don't have a say in the matter. Oh, and he never suffers from perils. Like I said earlier, Ahriman can spam out a lot more spells, but Eldrad's all about reliability. On top of that, for every additional Farseer in your army, you can reroll a Strands of Fate die, and if he's your warlord, you can keep an extra one on top of it. Those Farseers do have to be out of engagement range with the enemy, but that's still pretty huge. Very fitting stuff for someone who has decided he's taking fate into his own hands as of late. Of course, you might be thinking that's all well and good, but as not only a wizard but an Eldar one at that, he's probably pretty fragile. And admittedly, yeah, he's not the most durable at toughness 4 and 6 wounds, as much as that's pretty good by Eldar standards. But then you look closer. 4+ invulnerable save, and if the wound roll is a 1 through 3, it just doesn't hit him. He just says, no, you and your armor piercing can go to hell. But we're not done with the Eldrad dubs yet, because he's no slouch in melee either. Once again, pretty fitting, since he obliterated Abaddon himself. His shuriken pistol is, you know, whatever. Nice he has some range ability to get some little jabs in, but it's not gonna blow anyone's socks off. But his Witchblade and Staff of Ulthamar? Eldrad's coming to the fight swinging. With a WS of 2+, he's almost guaranteed to hit, and an unmodified wound roll of 2+ is always successful, no matter any rules the enemy might have. I can back this in my last point up too, because I goofed and got Eldrad surrounded by an entire squad of Khorne Berserkers. He killed 6 out of 10 of them before going down, given that he has 3 attacks at 2 damage each that are damn near guaranteed to go off. And to top all of that off, at 145 points, he's almost a steal, I'd say. Even in smaller games, he's a viable choice, albeit one that does make the army feel a bit small, and in larger games, he can be a huge benefit to the army that still allows for other heavy hitters or large squads. If you don't mind playing Ulthway, he's a banger of a choice, and he doesn't even have to be your warlord. Ain't that swell? As for lore downsides, there are a few I can admit to. While I think his record is very much defensible, at the end of the day, a loss that isn't your fault is still a loss. And Eldrad's certainly familiar with loss. While arguably a strong point, I mean he takes a hit but keeps on truckin', you've still got someone in your army that has a record of losing. And again, I can verify this on tabletop, I'm ashamed to say. Fucking Khornates. I would remove Khorne over the Space Wolves, by the way. I think the Space Wolves can theoretically be saved, though they never will be. Khorne sucks to the core the moment you take him out of Total War. Didn't need to throw that in there, just, I feel like it's been a while since I bitched about Khorne, didn't want anyone to think I've gone soft. He's also an Eldar. For anyone with a functioning brain, that's a massive positive, but I know lots of you still have bricks for a frontal cortex, so you might not like him for that reason alone. And if you think Psykers are pure evil and must be purged because you drank the Black Templar Kool-Aid, you really won't like Eldrad. Of course, again, if you have that as an issue for picking an Eldar character, I don't understand what you're doing here. If you don't like wizards, I don't know why you're looking at the elves. How about tabletop downsides? Well, despite his toughness, he's still not gonna stick around long if you really screw up with his positioning. For the third time, I can confirm this from experience. I will be moving on now to keep myself from becoming overly bitter. Something else, as you can expect of anyone who's a psyker, armies that can shut down psychic powers reliably are gonna make him a complete waste of time and effort. I really hope you didn't bring him against a Custodes player with some Sisters of Silence on standby, because if you did, you are probably going to be disappointed with your choices in life. Also at 145 points, while in bigger games losing him won't cripple your army, it'll still hurt. It's cheap enough that I'm willing to say you can use him as a distraction, but make sure you know what you're doing with that. And in smaller games, losing him probably will cripple your army, or at least really hurt. So be careful with him, will ya? He can hold his own, but plenty of things can still put him down. Second to last issue, if he's your warlord, you gotta play Ulthway. At least according to the guy I played my first game with. He might have just lied to me. Never know, but I'm sticking with that assumption. You're stuck with Ulthway if you want Eldrad to be in charge, which makes sense but is still a limiting factor. Of course, with that being said, I'm pretty sure 10th edition is removing sub-factions, at least in the terms of you pick the yellow elves, so you're Iandan. Of course, with that being said, there could also just be the Eldrad detachment, and if that's true, then he could damn well be even more limiting of a choice. I guess we'll see come summer, won't we? And for the final issue, his model. Now, it's not bad, it's nice. But two things of note are that one, he's got a lot of fiddly little details on him that make putting him together a bit of a pain, and painting him a lot of a pain. I mean, look at all the runes on his armor. Christ, I'm afraid to paint Eldrad. Those are all freehand too, so they're not just indentations you can fill in. He's just been primed on my table for over 2 years now, and I don't want to do anything substantial with him. But as for the quality itself, it's at that age where you can definitely tell it's an older one, relatively speaking. Pose isn't super dynamic, and compared to something like Jane Czar or the Avatar of Cain, he doesn't really stand out. So yeah, cool model, but just at the point in time where it's starting to show its age, even if it's not in a debilitating way. It's like he's at that age where you tease your dad and he says your old man is slowing down and a bit of you dies inside when you hear that, but you know he doesn't have a foot in the grave and it just reminds you a bit of the mortality of those you love. And that is Eldrad of Craftworld Ulthway, whose last name I still refuse to say a second time because I get tongue-tied often enough recording these, and that certainly doesn't help. My apologies for once again missing a weekend video release. I realized a bit too late I had 3 separate birthdays to account for this past weekend. Bit of a fuck up on my part. The rest of April and early May will likely also be a bit dodgy with video releases, as I plan on being away next weekend and will be away the following, so just as a forewarning. The next few delays are expected rather than me just screwing up and or being sick. As always, thank you to my wonderful channel members. You are the psychic powers to my Eldrad. You have in fact all given me the power to see the future. I predict there will be much more crap on this channel to come. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Eldrad, more like El-Chad, more like badass, more like fat cock, more like sex.